What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Commander Deck Tech video, and this time I want to go over this really cool brand new Commander option. We have Tourach Dread Cantor. So if you're familiar with the card Hymn to Tourach, this is Tourach. Has a kicker cost of 2 black, so you can pay an additional 2 black in addition to its cost to cast it. Protection from white. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on them. And when Tourach Dread Cantor enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target opponent discards 2 cards at random, so you basically get the Hymn to Tourach on that ability. So this is pretty much going to be a Tiny Bones deck in the same exact way. You're going to benefit off of that commander, you're going to want to benefit off of Tourach. You do, however, get to punish a single opponent with that discard. Discarding at random is brutal, and since it's 2 cards, you can pretty much empty someone's hand. If you're able to pile onto all that Tourach discard, it's going to make it very easy to empty an opponent's hand. So we have a couple Planeswalkers here. I've broken this up into different categories of card types. So I have Planeswalkers and Liliana of the Veil and Liliana Waker of the Dead. These two are pretty much focused on discard. Both of their pluses will allow us to force discard. Also, all of their abilities are useful, whether it be for removal, forcing them to sack a creature, or just giving a creature -X/-X equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. The alts are also going to be borderline game winners. We have our creatures. We have Asylum Visitor, so at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in their hand, we draw a card and lose a life. Again, very easy to accomplish in this deck. We have Burglar Rat and Elderfang Disciple. They enter and each opponent discards a card. Very simple. Doesn't force us to discard, which is great. And then we have Tiny Bones Trinket Thief, of course. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discarded a card this turn, you draw a card and lose a life. So kind of like another Asylum Visitor for card draw. And for 6 mana, each opponent with no cards in their hand loses 10 life. And we have Cunning Lethamancer. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card. Hypnotic Spectre. When it deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. We have Liliana Spectre. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. We have Opposition Agent to punish our opponents whenever they want to search. We can then search for a card that we want to get. Maybe they don't want us to get, but we get to steal something. We have Crypt Gas to double our mana. Whenever we tap a swamp, we get an additional black. And we have Fel Spectre. It enters, target opponent discards a card, and whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. So this is going to pile onto all the other brutal enchantments that we have in here. Then we have Mind Slicer. When it's put into a graveyard from play, each player discards their hand. That can also be pretty brutal. We have Rankle, Master of Pranks. You get those different modes, but we really just want to focus on having each player discard a card. But Flying in Haste means that we get to trigger that almost immediately. We have Sangromancer to benefit off of discard. Whenever an opponent discards a card, we may gain 3 life. We have Archfiend of Ifnir. Awesome card that I think belongs in every single discard deck, because whenever you discard a card, you put a -1/-1 counter on each of your opponent's creatures. We have Bone Miser to benefit us whenever we discard a card. Kind of like a Waste Not, but on a creature. You get a 2/2 black zombie. If you discard a creature card, you get 2 black mana if you discard a land card, and you get to draw a card if you discarded a non-creature card. And for win purposes, we do have cards like Grey Merchant of Asphodel in here just to gain some life back. Let's say we're getting ganged up on, at least that's some way of getting back into the game. We have Sir Conrad the Grim to benefit even more off of discard if our opponents are discarding a bunch of cards. Sir Conrad's going to deal a ton of damage to them for each of those cards. And then we have Miajin of Night's Reach. This is essentially another Mind Slicer, but even better, because if we're able to get it out there, it's well worth that 8 mana. We remove the divinity counter from it, and each opponent discards their hand. We have some sorceries in here. We have Vicious Rumors. For only 1 black mana, this is a ton of value. Deals 1 damage to each opponent discards a card, then puts the top card of their library into their graveyard, and you gain a life. So really just for 1 black mana, forcing discard is great. We have Demonic Tutor. We have Feed the Swarm. Great removal. Getting rid of enchantments is always useful in mono black. We have Torment of Hailfire. Borderline a win con if you dump a lot of mana into X, but really in here to force our opponents to discard, force our opponents to sacrifice their non-land permanents. We have Arterial Flow. Each opponent discards 2 cards. If we have a Vampire, which I don't think we will most of the time, they'll lose 2 life and we gain 2 life. Dark Deal. Each player discards all the cards in their hand and then draws that many -1. We have Delirium Skeins. Each player discards 3 cards, so that's one of the epic discard cards in here. 3 mana for 3 cards each player. You're going to trigger a lot of things. We have Grim Tutor to search up another card. We have Mind Rake, kind of like another Arterial Flow, but it's even better because the overload cost actually makes it cheaper. So for 2 mana, you can have each player discard a card. You can get it off a little bit quicker. We have Toxic Deluge to act as removal. We have Siphon Mind. Each other player discards a card, and you draw a card for each card discarded this way. One of the better mono black cards for card draw. And we have Awaken the Erstwhile. Always wanted to play this, always wanted to throw this into a mono black deck just because I think it's crazy. Each player has to discard their hand, and then for each card discarded, they create a 2/2 black zombie. Going to make our Tourach even bigger, and commander damage is an option, but we really just want to focus on discard and all the power that goes along with that strategy. We have our instants, mostly for mana. We have Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual over here. Cabal Ritual is so good because we can fill our graveyard up pretty quickly. We have Defile for removal. Mono black staple right now. We have Vampiric Tutor, just to get another card. We have Force of Despair to punish opponents who just want to go off and combo and have a ton of creatures enter the battlefield. Destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. We have Deadly Rollick. If we control our Tourach, which is likely, we get to, for free, exile target creature. In our artifacts, we have Bag of Holding. Whenever we discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. We can then pay 4 mana to tap it and sacrifice it to return all cards exiled with it back to our hand. So it's kind of like protection. Sometimes we don't want to discard certain cards, and this will help us get them back. We have Expedition Map to get us a Cabal Coffers, most likely, or an Urborg. We have Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble to get another land. We have Anvil of Bogarden. Pretty expensive, but if you have it, it's definitely worth it to play it in this deck. It's basically like a Howling Mine that forces you to discard a card as well, so it's just going to pile on to all the other discard that we have in here. We have Arcane Signet for more mana. We have Jet Medallion for cost reduction on our black spells. We have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots just to have some sort of protection for our Tourach in case we want to be more aggressive and deal commander damage. We have Mind Stone, and we have Geth's Grimoire to benefit off of discard by drawing a ton of cards. We have some enchantments in here. This is really what we want to do. We want to just get these out in addition to all of our other discard. These are going to deal a ton of damage. Quest for the Nile Stone. Whenever an opponent discards a card, we may put a quest counter on it at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep if that player had no cards in their hand, and this card has 2 or more quest counters on it. You may have that player lose 5 life. That's ridiculous. And we have Shrieking Affliction at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. If they have 1 or fewer cards in their hand, they lose 3 life. We have Animate Dead just to get back something from a graveyard that was likely discarded. We have Liliana's Caress. Whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose 2 life. And we have Waste Not to benefit from discard in probably the coolest way. Basically Bone Miser, but for our opponent's cards. And then we have Bottomless Pit. During each player's upkeep, that player discards a card at random. Random is very important because it means that they could discard something that they don't want to discard. We have Megrim, basically Liliana's Caress, but 1 more mana and it deals damage instead of having them lose life. And Necrogen Mists. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card from their hand. We have Oppression. Now it starts to get a little bit more brutal here. Whenever a player plays a spell, that player discards a card from their hand. We have Phyrexian Arena just to get a little bit more one-sided card draw. We have Words of Waste. The next time we would draw a card this turn, we can pay 1 mana. Each opponent discards a card from their hand instead. So this, in addition to something like a Phyrexian Arena, means that we can skip a card draw if it's something extra that we're getting, and that instead would just act as more discard. And then we have Court of Ambition. In addition to becoming the Monarch, we can have them lose 3 life unless they discard a card during our upkeep. If we are the Monarch, they instead lose 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. We have Leyline of the Void just to be even more brutal to our opponents who are discarding cards, because if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. We have Raider's Wake. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. And we have Painful Quandary. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless he or she discards a card. So that right there, this and Oppression are just incredibly brutal. It makes it very difficult for our opponents to get back into the game if they're constantly discarding, they're losing life off of discarding, or they're losing 5 life off of this. And our lands are pretty much what you would expect in mono black. We got Bajuka Bog to deal with graveyards. We have Cabal Coffers to go along with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, so you get a ton of black mana off of that. We have Cabal Stronghold to kind of be a pseudo Cabal Coffers. Not going to give you as much black mana, but it could still give you some. We have Castle Lochthwain to give us some card draw if we need it. We have Gaia Reach Sanitarium to give draw and discard. We have Myriad Landscape to give us some more swamps. We have Nykthos to give us more black mana for our devotion. And then we have War Room to give us some card draw. And we do have 26 swamps. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this Tourach deck. I don't know if this is going to be as powerful as Tiny Bones. I think Tiny Bones' ability acts as a win con, so it's actually slightly better, but you do get a more combat-focused strategy here. You could at least go for that because you have the +1/+1 counters, and for that reason you could go for a +1/+1 counter strategy and discard, so it's a little bit more flexible, but this is really the first draft of this deck that I'm going for. Really think this is going to be a powerful commander. But anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. I will have the deck linked in the description, as will the link for my Twitter and my Mox field. So again, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much. Void here signing off. See you all next time.